people think that life is forever changed after a paranormal event, that nothing goes on as it used to. But that's not so, at least not for me. And maybe that's the strangest part about it, how abnormally normal the incomprehensible can feel. And while it's happening, you're simultaneously suspended between the ordinary and the absolutely unexplainable. But before I go into details of this first threatening encounter, I would like to share with you the making of this handbag from start to finish. From the winding of the weaving yarn, to the tablet weaving of the strap, the needle punching of the outer layer, the resalvaging of my daughter's outgrown fuzzy sweater for the inner lining, to the final sewing assemblage. I needed something that could hold all that I carry, which is almost nothing. I hope you enjoyed this process as much as I did. Anyways, on with the story. After seeing the movie Mothman Prophecies in 2002, I scared myself into not looking out of windows at night in case something would be looking back at me. So for almost 17 years, I kept my eyes down at night when I was near windows. But it just so happened that in the house I was living in at the time, there were 14 large windows in the living area that looked out into the untamed North Carolina wilderness. So I figured that it was high time that I get over this fear. And every night, I would force myself to look out of the windows into the pitch darkness to prove to myself that nothing was there. This became a habit. It's important to know that where I lived was very rural, a small place called Fletcher. We had almost 20 acres of land, and about 18 of those acres were all woods, which according to the paranormal researchers I later hired, connected directly to what they dubbed as the Spooky Woods in Marion, North Carolina, which was quite a bit a ways. We had very few neighbors, and our road led to nowhere except our homes. My mailbox was over a quarter-mile from the house, because that's as close as the mail person was inconvenienced to come. And even four-wheel drive vehicles had a hard time getting up our steep gravel driveway. Now, I take you to a specific winter night in January of 2019 when we got a big snowstorm. It was a bit unusual for that much snow to come down all at once, but alas, it did. I woke up around 4 a.m. to go to the bathroom, and after doing so, I went to the front door, which was actually two doors, made mostly of glass with a wooden frame around it. I turned on the floodlight that looked over the front yard and admired the pristinely flawless white layer of snow glistening over the yard. Then I took my gaze to the wood line beyond it that surrounded the entire house. Nothing looked back at me. I looked at the little chicken coop we had near the house and saw the red light of the heat lamp still on, glowing through the door crack. I admired the flawlessness of the snowfield once more, and in my head announced, "'Tis 4 o'clock, and all is well." Like I was my own town crier or night watchman. My partner at the time was away for work in a different country, and this was my own silly way of reassuring myself. Later that morn, I woke up at 8 a.m. As I got my children their breakfast so they could go play in the fresh fallen snow, I looked out the door and asked my son to let the chickens out of the coop after he ate. But then I saw it. In the very middle of the clearing in the front of the house laid something half buried in the snow, a brown and very still blemish on the perfect blanket of glistening white. As I looked at it, I thought it was a brown plastic bag from the local supermarket, Ingles, that might have blown in from the snowstorm. I absolutely despise littering and decided to go get it, and while I was out there, to just go on and let the chickens out from the coop. I told my son to keep an eye on my daughter in her high chair while I did the simple task and took in the fresh winter air to assess the temperature so I could dress them accordingly. As I approached it, I quickly realized this was not a plastic bag. It was a chicken. I was immediately overcome with sadness that one of the chickens must have frozen to death in the storm, not having gone into the coop in time for the nightly lockup. I gently picked up the hen and was struck by shock when I realized that it was headless. My mind immediately went into high alert, my first thoughts going to the stories of chupacabra from my childhood in the farms of Brazil. I immediately knew I had a mystery on my hands, and my bit of knowledge from my criminal justice classes in college kicked in. I froze in place to not disturb the scene and assessed the surroundings. These were my mental notes. The first mystery was, how did the chicken lose its head? I had lost chickens to predators before, and there is always a mess of feathers, flesh, blood, and struggle. There was nary a feather out of place, nary a drop of blood. The snow all around the hen was perfect, as it had been 4 hours before when I looked over it earlier before dawn. There were no tracks, so I pushed chupacabra to the bottom of my suspect list and tried for a more reasonable suspect. How could the lack of tracks be explained, though? Perhaps a mountain lion got the hen, who had been left out, murdered it closer to the coop so the mess was elsewhere, and climbed the tree to enjoy the meat of the body, then accidentally dropped it from above into the perfect snow. So I looked up. There were no trees anywhere near the very center of the clearing. The mountain lion would have had to baseball throw the hen from the first trees of the wood line for it to land where it did. Also, I noticed that less than a half inch of snow had fallen since my previous surveillance of the surroundings at 4 a.m. So if there had been tracks, they would have still been visible. Another point of notice was how cleanly the hen's head had been done away with, like it had been cut by a knife and not by teeth and claws. Then I thought, did someone come up here, kill my chicken, then toss her head into the center of the yard where I would find her? I put the chicken back down, took a picture, and moved on to the chicken coop. I had chickens be left out at night before, and usually all they did was circle the coop till they eventually settled themselves on top of it. When I got there, I saw no tracks of chickens around the coop, no disturbance at all in the snow in the coop. And remembering when I had seen it earlier there was nothing of notice around it or on it either then. There had been 0 chickens in the yard or coop area at 4 a.m. Keeping my footsteps neat and as undisturbing as possible, I carefully rounded to the back of the chicken coop that faced the woods, and then I saw it. Tracks. I took out my camera and, keeping at least 2 or 3 feet distance from it, I recorded the steps around the chicken coop. I'm no expert on tracks, but they looked human-shaped to me. They came from the woods, rounded the back and the side of the coop that faced away from the house, and while recording, I followed them. They went behind my house. Before continuing my investigation, and not knowing if whoever did this was still around, I headed back inside the house to get my axe and a rifle. I put the kids by the front door just in case, and headed back out. The steps went all around the house, and wherever there was a window into the basement, it looked as if the person went forward towards it, looked inside, then continued their track around to the next window. Every window had been looked into. My partner had some very expensive things in the basement, so I thought surely someone was planning a robbery. But the steps had become different than what they looked like by the coop. Yet they must have been done by the same creature since I had followed them unbroken. I took pictures and recorded everything in case more snow came and erased any evidence. It didn't though. I searched high and low within iCloud for these images, but unfortunately they must have been lost with the later demise of the phone that took them. The next part was the strangest of all. Having the house been built on a mountain, some of the land was at a steep slant. And on this side of the house that I was on now, we had some very large steps that led to a lower part of our property. I must describe this part in detail because it is of utmost importance to understand the oddity of what I saw next. These steps were made from dirt and railroad ties, large and sturdy pieces of wood, and each step was very wide. When going down or up a regular set of stairs, only one step fits into each stair step. But these steps, having been so wide, you had to step up on one, then take about 2 other steps till you could step up onto the next one. Even the tallest of men could not reach the steps from the one previous to it. One had to take multiple steps to reach the one that followed it. But the tracks upon these steps defied all explanation. They were no longer human-shaped. They were round, perfectly round, and about a foot apart from each other. And not one in front of the other like regular walking, but directly next to each other. So almost each one of the stair steps, with some of them having been skipped completely, had 2 circles side by side, with no paw imprint within it. I thought maybe a cougar may have leapt from one step to another. But then how come there were human-looking tracks at both the top and the bottom of these outdoor stairs? And there was no fuss about these marks, just 2 perfect circles, side by side. Keeping clear of them so as not to disturb it, I made my way down and followed the steps into a patch of woods that separated our property from the private road below. And I was not about to go into any patch of woods. Another peculiar thing I noticed as I headed back to the house was that at parts there seemed to be a secondary set of steps, like a dog or something, but they appeared, then stopped, then reappeared and stopped again. I went inside and immediately called the police. Someone was staking out my house and was probably going to come back and rob it later that night. And I was there all alone, with a small child and a baby. The police said they were not equipped to handle this type of weather and that my location was remote and the roads there unplowed. They told me they had no idea when they would arrive and to stay armed and ready till they got there. While I waited, I thought, what a stupid day to try and stake out a house. The snow showed their tracks, and our house was literally the hardest one to get to in the entire neighborhood. Nor was it the richest or nicest one by far. How would they even get a vehicle up here? My driveway was unplowable, and by foot it took cardiovascular effort to make the steep angled climb. It was not an easy getaway in the best of weather, and snow made it a true masochistically impossible venture. What was the plan here? And how on earth were those circle prints made? About an hour later, 2 officers hobbled up the driveway in a sweat. I told them everything and walked along the tracks with them. One of them was a hunter and said that the tracks by the coop were deer tracks, but was also stumped on how a deer would open up the coop, take a chicken, behead it so cleanly, and throw it into the clearing. He noted that the tracks kept changing from deer to human, and when we got to the road tie stairs, they just shook their heads, baffled as I was. The officers concluded that I had traced the steps backwards. They had instead begun at the bottom of the stairs, having come from the road, circled the house, looked into the windows, and headed towards the coop, beheaded the chicken, tossed it into the clearing, and headed off into the woods, the deeper woods. They followed the tracks into the wilderness. Then they returned with the chicken head, having found it there, and mentioned how there were no feathers, blood, or fuss along the way, and most baffling of all, how all the tracks simply stopped. It didn't head towards a tree that it climbed or anything like that. It just stopped, abruptly. The 2 officers very apologetically said there was truly nothing they could do, and how they couldn't really patrol the area, especially in this weather, and with how many accidents they were having on the icy roads. They asked me if I was savvy with the rifle I had across my back, to which I assured them I was an expert shot. And they said to me these exact words: "If anyone comes up here tonight, shoot first. Call us second. Don't bother calling us if anyone is up here trying to get in. We won't make it in time. And don't worry about murder charges when you're protecting your youngins and your property." I nodded and they laughed. After their departure, I immediately sent all the videos and pictures to the owners of the farm I worked at a mile down the road. They were expert hunters and trackers for generations, and if anyone could tell me what could make those tracks, it would be them. The father and son duo looked over my evidence and agreed with the one officer that the tracks kept changing from deer to human, and the second enigmatic pair that kept appearing and disappearing were that of a dog. The circles on the railroad tie stairs truly stumped them as well. They said the most peculiar thing about them, besides the circular shape, was how it left no dragging flakes of snow as it moved. He explained to me how when any walking creature moves through snow, the feet or paws usually drag along because of the depth, and leaves a track of little snow clumps between each step that's picked up by the top of the foot when moving from one step to the other. But alas, these markings of regular movement were all absent here. He said it was as if 2 cylinders were placed side by side, then lifted straight up and landed on the next step. And some of the steps having been skipped, having no marks at all. It just lifted straight up and then landed perfectly down. It made no sense at all, and there were no other tracks in other areas where they might have gotten down to the bottom. And the human footprints began back up at the bottom of those stairs, showing that whoever made the tracks had to take the stairs to get down instead of climbing down the hill or sliding down in any other manner. I didn't sleep that night, and hardly slept the following night either. The rifle stayed on me for almost 3 days, but each morning for weeks I would check for tracks or any signs of trespassing long after the snow was gone, and never found anything again. What did any of it mean? Why behead the chicken and not even bother to eat it? Why leave the body where I could find it? What was it looking for? And above all, What the cuss was it? I moved on with my life after that second night. I didn't obsess over it. I minded my home and my children. I worried about simpler things. I still looked out the windows at night, but now it was threateningly, with an "I dare you" look in my eye. I felt safe in an armed home against whatever prowled the woods. I almost wanted it to come back. I don't like leaving problems unsolved, stones unturned. But the mystery remained. Other peculiar things happened in that faraway house, which is why I called the paranormal investigators later on, but none of it came from the outside woods ever again. Not being a fan of scary movies or any such things, I didn't hear the words "Skinwalker" till after I finally came face to face with the creature 3 years later on March of 2022. And this time with another witness. But that's a story for another time. Thank you, friend, for listening to my unexplainable tale. It means very much to me that you are here. I hope that you are well, and I hope the remainder of your day goes as you wish it should. Until next time, ha det.